This area here is not the most productive, and to achieve our goal of growing a year's worth of food, we need to use every inch of our land, expanding our plot so that we can grow a year's worth of food. Today we're tackling this part of the allotment. It is absolutely plagued with perennial weeds. So we're going to go through, we're going to pull up all of the black plastic, and we're going to make this into a lovely area. Jasmine can have some beautiful raised beds. The raised beds are going to be made out of material that we've upcycled from our duck hut. Why raised beds and not just beds like I'm doing already? Tons and tons of benefits to having raised beds. Here we've got clay soil. Clay soil is really hard to work with, really difficult to add organic matter in. You can add as much organic matter into a clay bed as you like, but every single year my soil doesn't look like it's been touched. So having raised beds will be able to control what the soil is like in this area and hopefully get a better yield or more crops. Raised beds are easier to maintain because you don't have to deal with pesky perennial weeds. The raised bed will produce a higher up area, so hopefully when the ground gets boggy, the bed won't. Raised bed gardening is really good for young people because it's a concentrated area that's really easy to plant, water, etc. and it's not too daunting. And we're hoping that a little bit more motivation will help her get into the garden and get growing. We did move in some perennials here, but we're just going to pull them out and move them. We're going to remove all this black plastic because it's all gone manky and gross and replace it with some more weed membrane so that the perennial weeds, which are a massive problem here, don't come up through. This weed membrane is now super heavy because it's got loads of weeds and like debris over it, so we're just going to move it out of the way. But this bit's all right, so we're going to be reusing it. Next thing we're going to do is go through and take up all the bricks and pull up all of the perennial weeds. This area has an issue with two types of weeds: bindweed and stinging nettles. Stinging nettles have yellow root and bindweeds have these white roots. Now, both of them, if you even get a tiny little piece like this left in the soil, it will re-sprout. So we need to lay down a membrane to make sure that they aren't re-sprouting, to suppress the weeds and make it easier for Jasmine to maintain this area. Stinging nettles grow at the surface deep at all, so if you do grab them, they do come out, but be careful because they can snap you back into your face. Whereas bindweed grows much deeper and it's really quite awful to try to get out because it snaps and it's very brittle. Best thing to do is not put them in the compost but burn them. So this is also a perennial weed called a dock, and they're very woody. So when they grow, they'll grow through weed membranes. If you see any, make sure to pull them out. So the plastic is just a little bit too short, so we're going to use this old plastic, which is nothing wrong with it, just to line the very end near the fence. It looks really good. Now we're going to be moving the boxes in. These are just like pallet boxes we use to make a duck coop. Now we don't have any ducks anymore, we're going to repurpose them. The only issue with reusing these pallet collars as garden beds is there used to be a duck door here, so we're going to have to fix this hole so we can use them as garden beds and the compost don't fall out. So we have to make sure the beds are spaced out enough so that we can get a wheelbarrow through, which makes filling them with compost much easier and harvesting heavy items much easier. So we've decided to space them out for about 3 foot between the beds, making sure that we've got ample room to move a wheelbarrow and do whatever we need to do. Because the beds are only 3x4, you can garden like this and not have to step on the beds. Not walking on the beds will stop the soil being compacted, which would be better for the plant. To build these beds, we have a little problem. The duck doors have holes in them, so we need a little bit of power. Thanks to our sponsor in today's video, we have that power. All Power is a battery that's solar powered. It's incredible, and that's what we're going to be using for our job. They sent us their power station and solar panel pack, which we're going to be putting to the test here at the allotment. This beast has a staggering capacity of 1,152 watt hours. And the best part, it has over 3,500 charge cycles by counting all of this wood, and I think it used about 2% of the battery's capacity. So Bob's going to use a main power skill saw to chop the wood up. To make the best of raised beds, you need to make sure that you have good soil. We're going to be using horse manure, which is a really good and free way of filling up the beds. But if you don't have that option, you can layer that up the bottom with sticks and twigs, which will help with water retention. To make sure that these beds are as productive as they can be, we're using horse manure, which is full of nitrates, which will be really good for the soil. It is very well rotted as well. The way you can tell it's very well rotted is it doesn't have a smell. Just smells like soil. Because we're growing in raised beds, we really need to be quite organised with how we're growing. Make sure that I pick plants based on their root requirements and their space requirements. When space is limited, you really want to focus on really expensive foods. Cherry tomatoes, pole beans, spring onions, herbs. All of those crops are quite expensive in the store, but quite easy to grow, and they don't take up that much room. Cut and come again lettuce is super easy to grow. You just trim the outer leaves and it will last for months. But a pack of lettuce is really expensive in the shops. So you're making the best use of your limited space. Multi-harvest crops like peppers and tomatoes and even aubergines are really good because you get to harvest again and again and again. To make sure the beds are the most effective they can be here in the UK, we want to be having something to harvest every season of the year. In the UK, we can grow in every season. It's just all in the planning. Winter harvest can be a really effective way of producing more food all year round. Utilising things like succession growing. Now, succession sowing means that you're sowing something, say, every 2 weeks. This allows you to plant out things in small drips and drabs so you don't have an overwhelming amount. Things like lettuce and radishes, you don't want to have in a massive abundance because you can't eat them so quickly. But how do you make the most out of your raised garden beds? Planting strategies are going to have a significant impact on the yield of these beds. We have certain techniques, which I'm going to go through, that can yield more crops per square foot. Green routines, crop rotation and mulching. Mulch like this or straw or even grass clippings are fundamental on a raised bed because raised beds can dry out fast. Keeping areas weed-free will really help with yield. And monitoring plants for things like pests and diseases. Keep beds well weeded. Companion planting is also really important. I got some of these bulbs from one of my plot neighbours, and these will be perfect for bringing in pollinators, beneficial insects. And I know that these are super late going in, but I just got them. And I thought this would make it look really nice in this area where there's not very much growing and the tarp is a bit too short. Companion planting can be really beneficial in a small area. By putting basil next to tomatoes, it makes the tomatoes taste better and it can make yield and taste better. Prevent pests. Into sowings where you have a plug plant and you place it into the ground whilst you're waiting for a harvest, or you plant the seed directly in the soil. Grow vertically. Vertical gardening is a cheap, easy way to maximise your space. Moving plants up off the ground means that they need less room between crops and prevent diseases. I've grown courgettes vertically before and they've absolutely grown amazingly. But how much do these beds actually help us produce a year's worth of food? With 4 beds, 3 by 4 feet, 12 square foot of space per bed, estimating there's about £1 of food per square foot. You'd yield somewhere between 12 to 24 pounds of food. Times that by 4 because you've got 4 beds. And you're looking at 48 pounds of food from them 4 little beds. Now, considering that a person will consume about 353 pounds of food per year, it doesn't get us massively close to our goal of self-sufficiency. But every little bit helps. I like to think it gets us that little bit closer. 48 pounds worth closer, which isn't too shabby. This can also increase the likelihood of Jasmine getting involved in the garden, which is a win-win in my book. So this area that I've used to make these raised beds are 6 by 7, 56 square foot of space. That would yield 56 pounds of food, assuming that we don't have things like paths, etc., which we know that we have. So I'm not too sure if I would grow that much more in the space. What do you think? Well, considering the significant issues that we had, it will give us an additional 48 square foot of growing space that we didn't have before, which will hopefully be weed free. Would it be easier and better for me to grow in the ground like I've done before? Well, yes, if I didn't have such an issue with weeds. But this way, I get my cake and eat it too. Making the most of the area means that we'll have to be really careful about when we sow, what we sow, and have something that's always ready when we're about to harvest. But what do you think? Was that a good use of the space? We also have big plans for this area, so make sure you're subscribed so you're not missing out on what we get up to.